Welcome to our Croner Taxwise webinar programme. If you've got any questions at all, make sure you call the tax or the VAT advice line. If you're not a client, give us a call on the number on the screen.
Hello and welcome to this Croner Taxwise webinar by myself, Mark Morton. I work for Mercia Group and we're delighted to be presenting this on behalf of Croner Taxwise. The session today is just to give you a little bit of a brief update on the, I suppose, legislative process for taxation purposes. We've had a bit of a strange year, you may have noticed, in terms of, well, in terms of lots of things, but certainly in terms of tax. Certainly over the last, I suppose, 7 to 8 years, we've had a fairly well-established process. We tended to get draft legislation released by the government and by HMRC, usually just before Christmas. That was consulted upon. That then went into the budget process. So you would generally have a budget in March time, a finance bill issued to reflect that draft consultation and other things. That was then debated through Parliament, normally before the school holidays, so early to mid-July we would then get a Finance Act. And that has been the process for certainly a number of years. Obviously, if you can imagine that process, dropping a general election partway through that process into the mix causes a bit of a problem with tax legislation. So earlier this year, we'd had draft legislation prior to Christmas. We'd had a finance bill issued after the spring budget of 770 odd pages of tax simplification. Certainly the biggest finance bill I think I can ever remember. And then the general election was called, which caused a bit of parliamentary difficulty. One option is to force all that legislation through Parliament in a couple of days, which means it gets no scrutiny. The trouble is we've tried things like this in the past, and what it leads to is bad law and it being amended later on, which causes even more confusion. So what the government effectively did was force through some bits of that legislation. So from a direct tax perspective, we had the off-payroll working, the public sector kind of IR35 concept was pushed through, salary sacrifice changes were pushed through, tremendously important things like the soft drinks levy. And then if you're renewing insurance policies in the near future, the insurance premium tax rise of 2% got pushed through. However, a lot of the direct taxation issues that would affect a lot of SMEs were put on the back burner. And there were some press reports saying, well, making tax digital has been dropped. Let's be clear, what has happened, certainly because the flavour of the government, let's say, has not changed tremendously as we sit here at the moment. What this really means is that legislation that was dropped out of the original finance bill will be reintroduced. And we have had kind of indications of that within the Queen's speech. Now, what was said within that, we will have a 2-year parliamentary term as opposed to 1. So we've got a kind of parliamentary legislative session lasting 2 years. And there was a comment made in the Queen's speech there would be 3 finance bills. So I think the first thing that's being said, we will likely have a finance bill sweeping up all of that legislation that was dropped out earlier in the year. That will be issued prior to the beginning stroke mid-July, if I had to guess. I would doubt very much, in light of the timescale, that will become law before the summer holidays. So I'm guessing what we will get is an autumn finance act, which could mean any time from September to kind of Christmas almost. What then happens, the Chancellor, Mr. Hammond, had said that he would move from spring budgets to autumn budgets. So we are still being told that there will be a full-blown autumn budget again. I would guess November, but it's a guess. Autumn again could mean any time between September and Christmas. So we'll get an autumn budget and then we'll get autumn budget the following year as well. So 3 finance bills will be summer this year, autumn this year and autumn next year, I'm guessing. And that will cover the tax legislation for the next couple of tax years. And that will have meaty things within it, such as the making tax digital process, some sort of substantial shareholdings exemption, changes to termination payments, corporation tax losses, etc., etc. So we know already that there's going to be a lot of meaty stuff floating through Parliament later this year. A couple of other things that were said in the Queen's speech, just to get you up to date. One thing was that there was an allusion to having low taxes. I would question whether we actually have low taxes at the moment, but low taxation was a basic principle. And the final thing, a national insurance bill to sweep up some of the things that we've already been told about NI changes. Bear in mind that isn't the rise in Class 4, which was hastily dropped after the budget, but we had been told that Class 2 will be abolished anyway. There may be stuff to do with that in the NI bill. National insurance changes to do with termination payments, I would guess. And also, something that was mentioned earlier in the year, a statute of limitations. Arrears of national insurance generally work on a 6-year timescale because of the statute of limitations. The idea that you would bring that process more into line with direct taxation, so the concept of careless and deliberate and so on. Now, bearing in mind the revenue can already go back 6 years for arrears of NI, I think the major implication of that would be to create the ability to go back 20 years for deliberate kind of non-payment misdeclaration of national insurance. So I would guess the main change on that is not going to be tremendously positive as and when it's experienced. So you can see we've got a lot going on. This is all subject to Brexit, of course, so we may, of course, throw it up in the air again in the near future. But I think at the moment we're getting a bit more of an idea of what the parliamentary process and timing of tax legislation will be going forward. Hope that you find that useful as a bit of an update post-election, and obviously we will come back to you again in the future if things are likely to change. I hope you've enjoyed this update on post-election tax legislation issues. Thank you.